Most people believe that if they care enough, try harder, and give more of themselves, eventually the other person will notice their value. They assume that persistence creates appreciation, and that constant effort will eventually earn love, respect, or attention. So they keep sending the first message. They keep making the first call. They continue checking whether someone has replied. They keep finding excuses to stay connected, hoping that one day the relationship will become balanced. But human nature rarely rewards what is constantly chasing it. In fact, the more desperately you seek someone's attention, the more invisible your value quietly becomes. What begins as genuine affection slowly transforms into emotional dependence, and emotional dependence almost never inspires respect. People naturally value what feels limited. This principle exists everywhere in life. Rare opportunities feel more valuable than common ones. Limited resources receive greater attention than endless supplies. The same psychology applies to human relationships. When your time, attention, and emotional energy are always available without conditions, people unconsciously stop treating them as something valuable. It's not always because they are cruel or intentionally disrespectful. It is because the human mind quickly adapts to whatever becomes predictable. The easier something is to access, the easier it becomes to overlook. This is why chasing people quietly changes the balance of power. Every unanswered message followed by another message sends a silent signal. Every time you cancel your own priorities to fit into someone else's schedule, you communicate that their time is more important than yours. Every unnecessary explanation after being ignored tells them that keeping your attention requires very little effort. You may believe you're proving loyalty, but from a psychological perspective, you're often proving that your attention can be taken for granted. People don't simply listen to your words. They observe your behavior, and behavior always reveals what you truly believe about your own value. One of the biggest misconceptions is believing that chasing someone demonstrates confidence. In reality, confidence doesn't beg to be chosen. Confidence understands that genuine connection can never be forced. If someone consistently ignores your presence, your endless effort rarely changes their perception. Instead, it often confirms that you are willing to stay, regardless of how little they invest in you. Human nature notices imbalance. When one person is doing all the chasing while the other contributes almost nothing, the relationship quietly shifts from mutual respect to emotional convenience. One person begins depending on the connection, while the other simply becomes accustomed to receiving attention without earning it. This is exactly why some people continue ignoring those who chase them. They realize there are no consequences for their behavior. They know the messages will continue. They know the attention will remain available. They know the emotional investment isn't going anywhere. Without realizing it, the person doing the chasing teaches others that they never have to fear losing them. And when people stop fearing the possibility of losing your presence, they also stop appreciating its value. Human beings often recognize the importance of something only when they understand it is no longer guaranteed. Think about the individuals who naturally command respect in every environment. They are not constantly seeking approval. They are not chasing people who repeatedly overlook them. They don't force conversations that have already ended. They don't waste their energy trying to convince someone to see their worth. Instead, they quietly invest in places where their effort is returned. Their self-respect becomes stronger than their desire for acceptance. This doesn't make them arrogant or emotionally distant. It makes them emotionally balanced. They understand that relationships should be built on mutual effort, not one-sided pursuit. There is another truth that many people struggle to accept. Chasing someone doesn't only reduce your value in their eyes, it also reduces your value in your own eyes. Every time you repeatedly seek attention from someone who has already shown indifference, you silently train your mind to believe that your peace depends on another person's response. Your confidence slowly becomes tied to notifications, replies, and validation. Without realizing it, you surrender control of your emotional state to someone who may not even be thinking about you. That is one of the most dangerous forms of emotional weakness because it allows another person's choices to determine your sense of worth. The strongest people refuse to live this way. They understand that attention cannot create love, and persistence cannot force respect. They know that real relationships never require one person to carry all the emotional weight. Instead of chasing those who continue walking away, they protect their energy, invest in their own growth, and allow their absence to reveal what their constant presence never could. They understand that the greatest form of self-respect is knowing when to stop pursuing what has already decided not to pursue you. The moment you stop chasing people who ignore you is the moment you begin chasing a life that finally respects your own value. Have you ever wondered why the more attention you give some people, the less interested they seem to become? It feels confusing because common sense tells us that kindness should be appreciated, effort should be rewarded, and loyalty should strengthen a relationship. Yet human behavior often follows a different pattern. The problem is not always that people don't see your value. Sometimes they see it very clearly. The real question is whether they believe they must earn it. When your attention is always available regardless of how they treat you, your value slowly becomes expected instead of appreciated. This is the hidden psychology behind being ignored. It is rarely about your worth. More often, it is about the emotional dynamic you have unknowingly created. Human nature responds to emotional certainty in a predictable way. When someone knows you will always be there, always forgive, always send the next message, and always return after being ignored, they stop feeling any urgency to protect the connection. They begin assuming your presence is permanent, and anything that feels permanent often becomes invisible. This is not necessarily because they are heartless. It is because the human mind naturally pays more attention to what it might lose than to what it already believes it owns. When your attention feels guaranteed, people unconsciously stop treating it like something valuable. Many people mistakenly believe that being ignored is always accidental. Sometimes it is. Life becomes busy, responsibilities increase, and people genuinely forget to respond. But repeated patterns tell a different story. When someone consistently ignores your effort while making time for what truly matters to them, they are communicating something without using words. Every unanswered message, every delayed response without explanation, every one-sided conversation becomes information. Instead of accepting that information, many people choose hope. They create excuses, defend the other person's behavior, and convince themselves that trying harder will eventually change everything. But hope without evidence often becomes emotional self-deception. There is another psychological reason people continue ignoring those who chase them. Attention itself becomes the reward. Every time you continue pursuing someone after they withdraw, you teach them that distance increases your effort. Instead of encouraging them to value you more, your pursuit confirms that they can invest less while still receiving the same emotional attention. Human behavior naturally repeats whatever produces rewards. If ignoring you consistently results in more messages, more explanations, and more emotional investment from you, there is very little motivation for them to change. Without realizing it, you have trained the relationship to function on imbalance. This is why emotional dependence is so dangerous. It quietly transfers power from your hands into someone else's. The moment your happiness depends on whether another person replies, notices you, or chooses you, your emotional stability is no longer your own. Every notification controls your mood. Every silence creates anxiety. Every small sign of attention feels like relief. This emotional cycle has very little to do with love and everything to do with dependence. The more dependent you become, the easier you become to influence. Your decisions stop being guided by self-respect and start being guided by fear of losing someone who has already shown they can comfortably live without your constant presence. Emotionally strong people understand something different. They don't measure their worth by another person's attention. They recognize that genuine relationships are built on mutual investment, not emotional chasing. When effort becomes completely one-sided, they don't panic, they observe. They pay attention to patterns instead of promises. They understand that consistency reveals the truth long before words ever do. Rather than fighting for someone's attention, they quietly ask themselves a more important question. Is this relationship giving back the same energy it continues to receive? That single question protects them from wasting years trying to convince someone to value what they have already chosen to overlook. One of the hardest truths to accept is that not everyone who loses interest is meant to be convinced otherwise. Some people leave because their priorities have changed. Others leave because they never valued the relationship equally in the first place. Trying to force a different outcome rarely changes reality. It only delays acceptance. The strongest response is not convincing someone to stay. It is accepting what their behavior has already revealed and refusing to sacrifice your peace in exchange for temporary attention. Ironically, the moment you stop chasing people who ignore you, the emotional dynamic begins to change. Your attention is no longer guaranteed. Your presence is no longer assumed. Whether they return or not becomes secondary because your focus is no longer on controlling their choices. It is on protecting your own peace. And that shift changes everything. Confidence quietly replaces desperation. Self-respect replaces emotional dependence. Instead of wondering why someone keeps ignoring you, you begin asking why you ever believed your value depended on being noticed by someone who never learned to appreciate it. The moment your self-worth no longer depends on another person's attention is the moment their silence loses its power over your life. Most people believe that staying close to someone, constantly reminding them of your presence, and never giving them space is the best way to keep a relationship alive. They fear that if they stop calling, stop texting, or stop chasing, the other person will forget them completely, so they remain available every single day, hoping consistency will create appreciation. But human nature often works in the opposite direction. Constant availability rarely creates value. It creates familiarity. And familiarity, when it comes without balance or boundaries, often turns appreciation into expectation. People begin assuming you'll always be there, no matter how they treat you. The moment that assumption becomes permanent, your presence quietly loses the impact it once had. There is a psychological principle that shapes almost every relationship. People rarely recognize the value of something that never disappears. They notice change. They notice absence. They notice silence. This is why walking away is not about punishing another person. It is about allowing reality to speak louder than your effort ever could. As long as you continue filling every silence with another message, another explanation, or another attempt to reconnect, the other person never experiences what life actually feels like without your presence. You remove every opportunity for them to recognize your value because you never allow them to experience your absence. This is why emotionally strong people understand the power of silence. Silence is not a strategy to manipulate someone into coming back. It is a strategy to protect your own dignity. Instead of arguing with indifference, they simply step back. Instead of convincing someone to care, they allow that person's actions to reveal the truth. They understand that genuine interest never needs to be chased. If someone values your presence, they naturally make room for it. If they don't, no amount of pursuit will create feelings that were never there to begin with. Silence gives you something constant chasing never can. Clarity. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that walking away means giving up. In reality, walking away often means choosing yourself for the first time. It means refusing to invest endless emotional energy into someone who continues giving you emotional uncertainty. Every unanswered message drains your confidence a little more. Every one-sided conversation quietly teaches your mind that your value depends on another person's response. But the moment you stop chasing, something inside you begins changing. Your attention slowly returns to your own life. Your thoughts become less consumed by someone else's choices. Your peace no longer waits for a notification to arrive. Human nature is deeply influenced by contrast. People rarely appreciate light until they experience darkness. They rarely appreciate health until illness arrives. In the same way, many people only recognize the value of someone's presence after they experience its absence. This doesn't mean everyone will suddenly come back once you walk away. Some won't. And that is an important lesson by itself, because it confirms what constant chasing was preventing you from seeing. The relationship was being sustained by your effort alone. The silence simply reveals what was already true. Ironically, absence often communicates confidence far more effectively than endless explanations. The person who keeps trying to prove their worth usually appears uncertain about it themselves. But the person who quietly moves forward without begging for attention sends a completely different message. They demonstrate that their life continues with or without someone's approval. That kind of emotional independence creates curiosity because it breaks expectations. The other person expected another message. They expected another attempt to reconnect. Instead, they find silence. And silence forces reflection in ways that arguments never can. There is another reason walking away increases your value. It changes where your energy is invested. Instead of spending hours wondering why someone ignored you, you begin investing those hours into becoming a stronger version of yourself. You build new habits. You develop new skills. You strengthen your confidence. You reconnect with goals that were neglected while your attention was trapped in emotional pursuit. Over time, your entire presence begins changing. The confidence that grows from self-respect is different from the confidence that depends on external validation. It is quieter, steadier, and impossible to fake. This transformation also changes the way others perceive you. People naturally become curious about those who stop seeking constant attention. They begin wondering why your focus has shifted. They notice that your emotional stability no longer depends on their response. For some, this creates respect. For others, it creates regret. They realize they underestimated someone they assumed would always remain available. But whether they return or not is no longer the point. The greatest victory is not making someone miss you. It is reaching a place where your happiness no longer depends on whether they do. The strongest people never walk away to create guilt. They walk away to create peace. They understand that chasing temporary attention always costs permanent self-respect. By protecting their energy instead of begging for connection, they allow their absence to reveal a truth their presence never could. Those who truly value you will recognize your worth without being convinced. Those who don't have already given you the answer you were afraid to accept. The moment you stop fearing someone's absence is the moment your own absence begins carrying real value. There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that chasing attention is exhausting. No matter how much kindness they give, how much loyalty they show, or how much effort they invest, they still find themselves waiting for replies, hoping for recognition, and wondering why they never seem to receive the same energy in return. The painful truth is that the more your emotional well-being depends on another person's attention, the more control you quietly give them over your life. Freedom begins the moment you stop asking others to fill a space that only self-respect can fill. Most people believe confidence comes from being admired. They think feeling valuable depends on being chosen, accepted, or constantly appreciated by others. But that kind of confidence is fragile because it is built on circumstances you cannot control. The opinions of other people change. Their priorities change. Their emotions change. If your sense of worth rises and falls with their attention, your emotional stability will never truly belong to you. One compliment will make you feel unstoppable, while one moment of silence will make you question your value. That is not confidence. That is emotional dependence disguised as confidence. Human nature seeks certainty, but many people search for it in the wrong place. They look for certainty in another person's affection instead of their own character. They keep asking themselves, do they care about me? Instead of asking, am I building a life I genuinely respect? That single shift changes everything. The strongest people stop measuring themselves by how much attention they receive and start measuring themselves by the quality of the life they are creating. They understand that self-respect grows from keeping promises to yourself, not from collecting approval from others. This is why emotionally independent people behave differently when they are ignored. They don't immediately assume they have done something wrong. They don't spend hours replaying conversations in their minds, searching for hidden mistakes. They don't abandon their routines because someone failed to send a message. Instead, they continue living according to their principles. They continue working on their goals, protecting their peace, and investing in relationships that naturally return the same effort. Their identity remains stable because it is built on internal discipline rather than external validation. One of the biggest mistakes people make is allowing a single relationship to become the center of their emotional world. The more your happiness depends on one person's attention, the more fear enters your life. You begin fearing rejection, fearing distance, fearing silence, and fearing loss. Fear slowly changes your behavior. You become overly available. You hesitate to express your real opinions. You ignore disrespect because you don't want to risk losing the connection. Without realizing it, you start negotiating your own standards in exchange for temporary closeness. But every compromise made against your self-respect quietly weakens your confidence. True emotional independence begins with accepting a difficult reality. Not everyone will appreciate you, and not everyone is supposed to. Some people will misunderstand your intentions. Others will lose interest for reasons that have nothing to do with your worth. Trying to control those outcomes only creates frustration because you are attempting to manage something that has never been within your control. What you can control is how you respond. You can decide where your energy goes. You can decide who deserves your time. You can decide whether your peace will depend on another person's choices or your own. There is something incredibly powerful about building a life that feels meaningful even when nobody is watching. When your days are filled with purpose, growth, discipline, and personal goals, attention becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. You stop checking your phone every few minutes because your mind is occupied by something greater than waiting for a reply. You stop chasing conversations that no longer bring value because your own life has become valuable enough to hold your attention. This transformation is quiet, but its psychological effect is enormous. People naturally respect those who are deeply invested in their own purpose, because purpose creates a kind of confidence that approval never can. Ironically, this is often the moment when people begin noticing you more. Not because you changed yourself to impress them, but because you stopped needing their attention to feel complete. Emotional independence creates a calmness that cannot be manufactured. Your conversations become more genuine because they are no longer driven by desperation. Your decisions become stronger because they are no longer controlled by fear. You stop trying to convince people to stay, and instead you give them the freedom to choose. Those who truly value you will move closer. Those who will naturally move away. Either outcome protects your peace. The greatest victory is not making someone regret ignoring you. The greatest victory is reaching a point where their attention is no longer necessary for your happiness. That is the moment you stop living according to someone else's decisions and start living according to your own values. You become emotionally independent, and with that independence comes a confidence that no rejection, no silence, and no absence can ever take away. The day you stop needing someone else's attention to feel valuable is the day you finally become impossible to control. Most people believe that the best way to regain someone's attention is to remind them of everything they are losing. They post messages hoping to be noticed. They constantly check if someone viewed their story. They send one more text, make one more call, or search for one more excuse to stay connected. Every action is driven by the hope that the other person will finally realize their value. But human nature responds very differently. The harder you try to be noticed, the more obvious your emotional dependence becomes. Instead of creating curiosity, you often remove it. Instead of making people wonder about you, you answer every question before they ever have the chance to ask it. One of the greatest psychological advantages a person can possess is mystery. Mystery does not mean pretending to be someone you are not. It simply means refusing to reveal every thought, every emotion, and every insecurity to people who have not earned that level of access. The moment people can predict every move you make, they stop being curious. They know you will always send another message. They know you will always explain yourself. They know you will always return, no matter how many times they ignore you. Predictability removes emotional tension, and without tension, curiosity slowly disappears. Human nature is drawn toward uncertainty. People naturally become interested in what they cannot fully understand or completely predict. This is why emotionally disciplined individuals rarely feel the need to announce every feeling they experience. They don't immediately react to silence with panic. They don't chase explanations after every disappointment. Instead, they remain calm enough to let situations unfold naturally. Their emotional stability creates uncertainty because other people can no longer predict how they will respond. That uncertainty often commands more respect than endless attempts to gain attention. Many people unknowingly destroy their own value by constantly seeking reassurance. They ask questions they already know the answer to because they are searching for emotional comfort. They repeatedly seek confirmation that they are appreciated, loved, or important. But every unnecessary request for reassurance quietly communicates self-doubt. It tells the other person that your confidence depends on their response. Over time, this habit weakens your position because it shifts the responsibility for your emotional well-being into someone else's hands. Confidence that depends on constant reassurance is never stable because it can disappear the moment reassurance does. This is why begging for attention never produces genuine connection. At best, it creates temporary sympathy. People may respond because they feel guilty, obligated, or uncomfortable with your silence. But attention given out of guilt is not the same as attention given out of genuine appreciation. One fades quickly while the other grows naturally. Emotionally mature people understand this difference. They never force closeness because they know forced attention always carries hidden conditions. They would rather be genuinely valued by a few people than constantly chase approval from those who have already shown indifference. Instead of trying to make people notice them, emotionally strong individuals focus on becoming someone worth noticing. Their attention shifts inward. They develop new skills. They improve their health. They strengthen their discipline. They build meaningful goals that give their life direction. This transformation changes everything because their confidence is no longer built on external validation. It is built on daily progress. The more fulfilled they become within themselves, the less they need constant recognition from others. Ironically, this is often when people begin paying attention. Not because attention was being chased, but because authentic growth naturally attracts curiosity. There is another powerful truth that many people overlook. The strongest presence in any room is rarely the person trying hardest to be seen. It is usually the individual who remains calm, composed, and completely comfortable without becoming the center of attention. That quiet confidence cannot be imitated because it comes from emotional security. People sense the difference immediately. They recognize when someone is trying to impress them, and they recognize when someone is simply comfortable with who they are. One creates pressure, while the other creates respect. Over time, this emotional discipline transforms your relationships. You stop attracting people who only respond to desperation because desperation no longer exists. Instead, you begin attracting healthier connections built on mutual effort and genuine appreciation. You no longer waste energy convincing someone to value you because you understand that your worth is not decided by another person's attention. Those who recognize your value will naturally move closer. Those who don't will quietly move away, and neither outcome threatens your peace. The goal was never to make people feel guilty for ignoring you. The goal was to become so emotionally grounded that their attention is no longer required for your happiness. When you stop chasing approval, stop explaining your worth, and stop seeking validation from those who have already chosen distance, something remarkable happens. Your presence becomes calmer, your confidence becomes stronger, and your life becomes far more meaningful. People no longer see someone desperate to be noticed. They see someone who has learned to value themselves first, and that quiet transformation is far more powerful than any attempt to demand attention. When you stop trying to make people notice you, you become the kind of person they naturally begin wondering about. In the end, the greatest transformation does not happen when people who ignored you finally come back. It happens when you realize you no longer need them to. Most people secretly hope that one day the person who overlooked them will regret it. They imagine receiving an unexpected message, an apology, or a second chance that finally proves their worth. They believe that moment will bring them peace. But real peace never comes from someone else's regret. It comes from building a life so meaningful that your happiness is no longer connected to the choices of people who failed to appreciate you. The goal was never to make them return. The goal was to become someone who keeps moving forward whether they do or not. Human nature often underestimates what it believes will always remain available. This is why many people fail to recognize someone's value until that person has quietly moved on. Not because they suddenly became more valuable overnight, but because their absence removed the certainty that once existed. What was once guaranteed is now gone, and uncertainty has a way of making people see what familiarity once hid. But by the time this realization arrives, emotionally strong people have already changed. They are no longer standing in the same place, waiting to be noticed. They have invested their energy somewhere far more rewarding. Their own growth, one of the greatest mistakes people make after being ignored, is allowing rejection to become their identity. They begin believing that if one person failed to value them, they must not be valuable at all. That belief quietly affects every future relationship. They hesitate to trust. They become afraid to express themselves. They settle for less because they fear losing people again. But rejection is not proof of your worth. It is often proof of incompatibility, different priorities, or emotional immaturity. The moment you stop treating rejection as a personal definition, you regain the freedom to build your life according to your own standards instead of someone else's opinions. This is where discipline becomes more powerful than emotion. Instead of wasting months replaying old conversations, emotionally mature people redirect that energy into becoming stronger. They invest in their health because a healthy body creates a stronger mind. They develop new skills because growth creates confidence. They pursue meaningful goals because purpose fills the empty space that emotional dependence once occupied. Every small act of self-improvement sends a different message to your own mind. Instead of saying, "I need someone to choose me," you begin proving to yourself, "I am becoming someone worth choosing." That shift changes everything, because confidence built through discipline lasts far longer than confidence borrowed from someone else's approval. As this transformation continues, your entire presence begins to change. You no longer enter conversations hoping people will like you. You enter them simply being yourself. You stop overthinking every message before sending it. You stop wondering why someone hasn't replied. You stop chasing explanations from people who have already answered you through their actions. Your emotional energy becomes focused instead of scattered. The peace you once searched for in another person's attention begins growing from within. That kind of confidence cannot be faked because it is earned through experience, not words. Ironically, this is often when people from the past begin noticing you again. Some become curious because your attention is no longer available on demand. Others return because they realize they underestimated someone who quietly became stronger without them. But this time, the situation feels completely different. You are no longer desperate for their validation because your life has continued moving forward. Whether they return or remain absent no longer determines your emotional state. Their decision belongs to them. Your peace belongs to you. There is an important lesson hidden in this moment. Never confuse someone coming back with personal victory. Sometimes people return because they are lonely. Sometimes they return because other options disappeared. Sometimes they return because they finally recognize your value. But their reason is far less important than your response. The person you have become during your period of growth should never disappear simply because someone reappears. Self-respect means evaluating people by their consistent actions, not by temporary emotions. It means remembering the lessons that helped you become stronger, instead of abandoning them for the comfort of familiar attention. The strongest people never build their lives around proving others wrong. They build their lives around proving themselves right. They don't wake up every morning thinking about who ignored them. They wake up thinking about who they are becoming. Their purpose becomes greater than their pain. Their discipline becomes stronger than their disappointment. Their future becomes more important than their past. That is the difference between surviving rejection and growing beyond it. One keeps you emotionally attached to what happened yesterday. The other gives you the freedom to create something far greater tomorrow. As your reputation changes, people naturally begin seeing you differently, not because you demanded respect, but because you stopped begging for attention. They notice your calmness. They notice your confidence. They notice that your happiness is no longer dependent on being chosen. That quiet transformation commands more admiration than any attempt to convince others of your worth. The greatest revenge is not making someone regret losing you. The greatest victory is becoming someone who no longer measures their life by who walked away. In the end, the people who ignored you may remember your name, or they may not. They may regret their decision, or they may never think about it again. None of that changes the life you are capable of building. The only question that truly matters is whether you allowed their absence to destroy your future or inspire your transformation. The answer to that question will determine the direction of your entire life. The moment you stop chasing people who ignore you is the moment you finally begin becoming the person you were always meant to be.